Welcome to another episode of the Emulsion Podcast, a show for chefs who want to think better, increase their performance, and believe that it's possible to take lessons from what others have learned. I am your host, Justin Khanna, and I'd love to continue the conversation with you from this episode on my online Circle community. There you can share your 2 cents and learn about supporting the show on justinkhanna.com/support. For your convenience, it's also linked up in the description of your podcast player. Let's get into the show. My guest today is Chef Chris Spear, the owner of Perfect Little Bites and the host of the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. Chris and I became Twitter friends through pure internet spontaneity and have effectively become peers in this kind of culinarians that create media sphere. And if you enjoy this interview, I also recommend that you queue up any of my conversations. I think there's 2, possibly 3, with Ray DeLucci. He is not just a mutual friend of the 2 of ours, but he's just a wealth of knowledge from his experience running a hospitality-focused media brand as well. If at any point you would like to pause and check out Chris or any of the specific linkable things that we discussed, please do check out the show notes that are always available on justinkhanna.com/media or in the description of this podcast. Chris, thanks for returning the favor and coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. So glad we could get to talk a little bit more.
This may or may not turn into a 2.5 hour, fiesta, but we'll see where things go.
We had quite the conversation the first time.
It just kept going. As kind of a fun place to start, because I'm going to try to make it my only question where I do the thing where the character says the name of the movie in the dialogue. You've talked to a lot of chefs without restaurants. For those of us that grew up in an industry where long-standing, sustainable restaurants were the pinnacle of success for a chef, how do these chefs that you've spoken with end up defining success for themselves? And please use specific examples if any come to mind from what you've perceived.
I think, at some point really doing what you want to do on your own terms. I don't think working in a restaurant is often on your own terms. Sometimes even if you own it because you have other investors and you have to kind of appease a number of people. I think it's not really truly until you kind of strike out and do your own thing, like your really own thing, that you're successful. A lot of people seem to be successful. I would say someone like Matthew Jennings, who was on my podcast, someone who has won James Beard Awards, or I think he was nominated for James Beard Awards, has won things like Koshan 555, has a cookbook, had a restaurant in Boston with Acclaim, and then he seemingly walks away from it all to move from Boston to Vermont to live on a farm, and is now working for a grocery store, like a Healthy Living Market, consulting for them. And from the outside, you kind of think wow, someone who had it all, who kind of walked away. But I think, talking to a guy like him, he wasn't happy. He was physically unhealthy. I think he was mentally unhealthy and just needed to step away from that whole restaurant industry thing. And that's the common theme, I think, of what I'm hearing from people on my podcast. A lot of them are, household names within the chef community, and they're kind of blazing their own path. And many of them did start in the traditional restaurant environment, but have kind of figured out that's not where they want to be.
The fascinating thing about that identifier, Chefs Without Restaurants, is that we all start there, right? For the most part, barring someone who may or may not inherit some sort of restaurant empire from their parents or something. But as you gain experience and you build your repertoire and you feel more confident and you grow your network and you identify opportunities, whether it's in a certain city or in a certain type of cuisine, what are you noticing as reasons that people are reconsidering restaurants as an option and thinking that is it a symptom of the times, there's just more viable business opportunities available, or it's people are remixing things in this new way? What are you noticing on that front?
I think all of the above. The restaurant industry is tough. It's something I never really wanted to be a part of. When you talk about things like work-life balance, getting, paid what you're worth, if you went to culinary school, how much it cost versus what you are making out of there. And just, kind of all the stuff that comes along with it, the long days, the working every holiday, all that kind of stuff. It's is there a way that I can go and make the food that I want to make, feel fulfilled, still have time with my friends and family, still, maybe have some money or benefits or something, and figuring that out. And it just seems like there's so many more options. And I think a lot of them were around before. I mean, I'm sure there have been research chefs for decades, but it wasn't something people necessarily went to school to get into. I mean, how many years have, companies like flavor companies or spice companies been in existence or things like that? But you weren't presented that as an option. When I went to culinary school, my idea was that I was going to come out and either be an executive chef right away, because that's what I thought, and probably run my own restaurant at some points. And now I think there are definitely, I mean, kids don't even want to do that. They just want to go straight to being like a food content creator or YouTuber, or, I talk to a lot of people who are personal chefs. Like, a lot of them don't have any professional experience. They've never worked in a restaurant at all, never went to culinary school, and are essentially self-taught, and they just want to go cook in people's homes. And, that's fine too.
Would it be accurate to say that you could, before, it was either chase the path, in my mind, at least when I was like just starting, the two opportunities that had the most well-defined track record of success to get clout was like get a show on TV or do the restaurant thing. And then there was, like you said, there were all these other options. You could do R&D, you could go grocery, you could go private chef, you can go catering, you can do all these other sorts of things. But now, because of all of these new opportunities, you can get the clout with this other big, massive pile of opportunities. Would you say that that's accurate, and that's part of the reason? Because I think that there's this sense of self-branding, and there's we can talk about ego if you want, but I think that those little internal things can be satisfied now with pursuing all these sorts of other things. And so it's kind of like the path that I laid out first, that get a TV deal or get a restaurant isn't the only way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things I talk a lot about with people is the whole imposter syndrome thing, right? I think a lot of it is just getting over what is a chef, and, to yourself, what does it mean to be a chef? I think so many of us are tied up in our profession. Like, you meet someone and the first thing they say is like, it's like, oh, nice to meet you. What do you do? Right? And then you say, I'm a chef, I'm a photographer, I'm a lawyer. And we really self-identify as our career. So what does that mean? I think a lot of people really want to make sure if they say I'm a chef that they are a chef. And what does that mean? I actually was just on a panel an hour ago with a lot of other culinarians, and the topic was, what is a chef? Like, what does it mean to be a chef? And, I'm someone who went to culinary school for 4 years. I went through the American Culinary Federation. I only got certified at the sous chef level, but I felt like I was a chef. I'd been given the title of executive chef. And, I was very protective of that. When I decided I wanted to be a personal chef, I joined the Personal Chefs Association. And you go in this classroom and they say, well, as far as marketing, buy yourself a chef jacket, put it on, and go grocery shopping. And when someone stops you in the store and says, where do you work and what do you do? Tell them I'm a chef. And I was offended. I was kind of like, wow, I paid my dues. I spent $100,000 to go to culinary school. I have the training. And this, woman who's a stay-at-home mom can also call herself a chef. And I think that's, in a sense, gatekeeping, or, whether it's a cognitive bias of like, because this is how I did it to become a chef, then no one else can. And it took me a lot of time to kind of overcome that and say, well, there are a lot of paths. And yes, while I did X, Y, and Z and consider myself a chef, like, maybe other people are allowed to call themselves a chef as well. And it doesn't hurt anyone, right? Like, if you are a stay-at-home mom who's never cooked anywhere and you want to start a personal chef business, by you calling yourself a chef and you live across the country, you're not taking anything away from me. And I think that's the hard thing, is people really want to be protective of this thing. And I think they just need to let it go.
As you think back, and this is me taking advantage of the fact that I have a podcast host with the mics reversed, right? Do any episodes come to mind, or specific takeaways from guests that you've spoken with that you've really taken to heart and either adopted them as a mental model or incorporated them in how you work or how you cook or how you approach conversations, or even maybe made you reconsider what you're doing a little bit differently?
I take a little bit from all of them. I think just kind of, chefs who are kind of becoming comfortable in who they are. And I go back to Matt Jennings again, and maybe because I always feel like he's almost been like a mentor, like he's someone I've personally known for a decade. I'm from Massachusetts. He had a restaurant there. I've cooked, I've eaten in his restaurant a number of times, but also we had an issue with weight similarly where, like he was overweight and unhealthy. I was too. We both lost a bunch of weight at the same kind of time period, but just like being happy, finding what makes you mentally happy. I think there's a lot in this industry, like you're chasing accolades. Now, I've never worked in restaurants, but you're always chasing something like, can I get written up in this magazine or this newspaper? And, if I don't, am I good enough? And I think at some point you just have to say, like, it doesn't matter. Enough is enough. So, I really admire those people who've kind of come to terms with who they are, what they do, and just don't really kind of care about if that stuff comes along with it.
It's one of the fascinating pieces of our time is that you can see these conversations between mentor and mentee recorded like this, and like I'm just excited to see this potentially result in people being able to actually get excited about being mentored. And I'm saying that from the lens of like, I had a chef that I worked for in Norway, and I went back to Norway 2 Decembers ago, and he bullied him into having a conversation with me on the podcast. And we got to the end of the conversation, and he said something along the lines of like, "I'm sorry I was such a dick to you." And it was recorded. It's like, I don't know, like, and I'm just not from a sense of like, I wanted that from a, it's so satisfying to hear him say that kind of thing. But it's like, can that encourage more people to be like, oh yeah, like, because when you're working in a restaurant or when you're working for another chef or with your specific team, the blinders come on and that's all you see and that's all you think of from the perspective of like, this is the dynamic between sous chef and chef de partie, or this is how the executive chef talks to prep cooks. But as we're putting out these conversations, I hope that like that's certainly a goal of mine. I don't know if you have anything to speak to of that, but it's interesting to hear you say that.
And I also think that, it's hard not to be envious of people sometimes, like as I, before I even started Chefs Without Restaurants, as I was like doing more food writing and stuff, like I pitched to Plate magazine a bunch of times, and they kind of responded to me and said like, well, we really focus on restaurants and restaurant chefs. And like, you're like, okay, I get that. But now you see guys like Ray DeLucci and Line Cook Thoughts, who's like writing for them every month, and people like Amethyst Ganaway. And these are people I love, like been on my podcast, we've talked.
Yep.
But like I could very easily say like what the heck? Like I pitched them over and over and they kind of rejected me because I wasn't a restaurant chef. But now these, younger chefs who also don't have restaurants are getting the opportunity. Like, why them, not me, right? And I genuinely feel happy for them. Like I give them all credit. And I love to see their work, because I think it's time for a lot of these publications to finally recognize that there are chefs who are working outside of a traditional restaurant setting. But, that's the kind of stuff that I think you have to build up to, where it's just like, just because someone else is getting something doesn't necessarily take anything away from you. And I think that's a big ego thing.
I think that it's also, we haven't quite yet defined, and listeners are going to get angry at me because this is the third conversation in a row where I'm bringing up signaling. But it's like, in the past, a restaurant meant it carries with it a lot of signals. Like, people trust to come to you 6 nights a week. Someone trusted in you to put money behind this project, most likely. You really have to have your food semi-figured out to have a menu, like, structured and printed and all these sorts of things. So, like, what are the signals that could replace... And this is me trying to, like... analyze why a publication like Plate would not want to partner with someone who doesn't have a restaurant. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not that you can't speak to their audience. You certainly can, like you're doing it. But it's like, what could replace something like a restaurant and TV shows have the same signaling, right? Like the producer had to sign off on you as the host of this program, and someone had to recipe test your recipes. And so it's like, what signals are going to ultimately end up replacing these things that are previously like brick and mortar, tens of thousands of dollars a month in rent and insurance and staffing and inventory and all this stuff. Do you know what that might be? Like, does that need to take the place of awards, of follower count, of number of episodes recorded, number of cookbooks you have, maybe?
I mean, I just think with the food industry changing as a whole, the people in charge changing potentially, I think there's, now we're looking at new voices. And I love that the food media and these publications are kind of looking at some of the people who maybe aren't the same people who've always been in the food media and always had the same opinions. Like, they're diversifying, right? I guess that's the word I'm looking for, is diversification. And I think if you're someone who's been in the food industry and you've cooked and you have some experience and you have something to share, put it out there. I would love to hear from a wide variety of people these days. And I think we're on the right track with that. So I say, see what people have to say. And if it's something that you think is going to bring value to your organization, put it out there.
This is a fun question for you. I have a theory that I want to get your insight on, but I want to use your answer as a bit of a leading point. What would it take for you to say hell yes to a restaurant?
I'm not doing that. I mean, no, I'm in a zone where I like my work-life balance. Like I've always said, like I love my wife. I love my kids. I want to have a relationship with them. Like, how many chefs have gotten divorced or don't know their kids? Or, like, I had enough anxiety working in a contract food job. I was having physical ailments that required me to go to the doctor and undergo medical procedures. It was all due to stress working in a place that wasn't even a restaurant. At a restaurant, it would have been totally magnified. I don't have the money for that. I don't want to bring on investors who then have say in my vision. So, I think if you can't fund it yourself, there's no reason I would ever want a restaurant. That's something that I haven't even thought about since I was like 22 and I'm 44.
Great answer. However, as my leading question kind of stated, I was wanting to play off of this concept, maybe is what I'll call it, that I hope sees the light of day a little bit more, because I think it takes a lot of that pressure that deters people like you and I away from traditional restaurants. And that's the idea of a restaurant as we know it being a part of a larger project, a larger organization, a larger brand, or a larger initiative. And it's like that is the arm of that thing. That is the in-person gathering food thing. Because we've seen people, like, the concept of dining together as humans, I don't think is going away. How that works and how that can potentially be supported by, and the example that I share is like the concept that they did on Fifth Avenue in New York, which was like the Tiffany's restaurant. Or there's one that was Massimo partnered with his old college roommate to do the Gucci restaurant, and so it's like this idea that, and it doesn't have to be these, like, it obviously starts with the high-end brands because the resources are there and the brand awareness is there, but what does it look like for State Farm to open a restaurant? Because people like to go there and watch sports games. They're already doing ads on these things anyways to do an in-person representation. You as the chef could then run that State Farm restaurant. The audience is already so baked in. You're not necessarily worried about like having the restaurant part be the profitable engine because you have this other overarching thing that actually helps sustain the business. I'm fascinated by that, and I'd be curious to hear like where your head goes with concepts like that.
So I worked at IKEA. I don't know if we talked about this
Yes, we
before,
did talk about it. Yeah,
right?
we did.
So I worked at the one in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania, which is where the home office is. And we did so much R&D there. And we were actually testing a whole series of like high-end dinners and then dinner events there. Like we were doing like lobster dinners and things with a band. Like once a month we brought a band in and we would clear out the dining room and have like tables along the outskirts. And we did like a formal served dinner and we had a band and people would dance and doing things like that. IKEA's kind of innovative in that idea of they have a restaurant in their furniture store, right? And just kind of, I always loved that kind of thing where we got to play a lot with it at the place I was. I mean, the home office for all of North America was right there at our store. So we got to pilot a lot of things. And that was one of the projects, is creating, like, most of the stores, their dinners are $3.99 to $5.99, but can we get away with doing like a $7.99 to $12.99 dinner? And what would that look like? So we were, piloting that. I don't know if they've done that since I left. It's been 15 years now, but I do think that's an interesting thing. It's like, could you have like a formal dining experience inside of an IKEA? And this was while the store was open, so people were around shopping, but you had to make reservations and buy tickets ahead of time, and then come in and have this like really gourmet Swedish dinner. So I think that's something that I have played with a little bit there in that context.
Do you think that, and I'm going to use the word when, because I'm so convinced that this is going to happen as, people get more and more excited about in-person experiences. Do you see it happening more from chefs coming up and kind of like engaging with these brands? Or is it going to be something where the brands all identify at the same time that like this is a really freaking good idea, and they're going to seek out talent to staff their restaurants and run these culinary programs?
I think it's going to be a little bit of both.
Sure.
In my age group, I always talk about chefs aging out. Like you hit the mid 30s to early 40s where you're settling in. It's like you're looking for a little different opportunity. Maybe you've got some experience. I think a lot of big brands probably want someone who's experienced, at least the bigger name brands, and they're going to maybe go after some of those people who they would identify as, yes, he's had good restaurants and James Beard Awards and cookbooks. Let's see if he'd be interested in doing this. But then I think there are kids who just don't even want to get into that system and say, like, that's not for me. I don't want to go, quote unquote, pay my dues for 20 years in the restaurant industry. I'm just going to start like building my menu, whatever, my repertoire, and start pitching people from the age of 21. So I think you're going to see it from both ends.
I see it as also a potentially value, that maybe valuable is not the right word, but there's this whole segment of the industry, and I want to touch on this before we get into talking about your brand and confidence in building that, but they just like being operators. Like they don't need to have the gallivanting around the dining room kind of sense. Like they truly just want their hands on the food. They want to mentor young chefs. They want to work on menus. They want to get better at butchering, or they want to source better product. And this idea of being able to partner with an organization that allows you to do those things, and it's actually like it's baked in. Like I'm trying to think of a brand like Toyota maybe doesn't want everybody to know who the executive chef of Toyota is, but it actually will be this viable option for people to go into these projects where they can sustainably just do what they love, versus this idea of like, you have to be the face of this thing. You have to be on Instagram Live. You have to be all over our website, and you're gonna get 6 calls a month asking you to be on the next Food Network challenge kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to name names, but I know a chef really well who was the chef de cuisine for a really well-known chef, and this restaurant's won lots of awards and accolades and is well known. And after doing that for a number of years, he left it to move somewhere and become the executive chef for like the corporate dining of a bank, and decided to do Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And he's someone who won awards through Star Chefs and, could have potentially opened his own place based on that resume and just said, I worked for chef so-and-so for a decade, but decided that he would rather just go the corporate route and not have to do all that. He doesn't have to post anything on Instagram. He doesn't have to post anything on social media. He's getting paid really well, I assume, to do this job where he now gets to spend time with his family on the weekends and nights.
But that's the other point that might come with all of this, is that like that's our path out of these horrible stereotypes that we live with on the day to day in the industry of like, so Lexus did this big partnership where they were doing a bunch of like this like rotational kitchen, I'm pretty sure, in New York. I covered it on the podcast months ago, so I'm forgetting the semantics of it. But if Lexus as a brand wants to do a hospitality focused project, and you as the chef can say, they might look at you and say, why is the schedule like this? Like, people are working 65 hours a week. Like, we are contractually obligated to have people work 40 hours a week. Most chefs would say something to the effect of, well, then I need to hire more people, or something in the budget needs to change. And the solution of Lexus handing that person a check and saying, just make it happen, tell us what needs to happen, that then can be like the guiding light for everybody, and everybody can kind of like, because I'm constantly thinking through like these practical solutions that are going to work, because I'm reminded of things like Jessica Largy in LA, when she had the backing of the co-director, producer, one of the Russo brothers from the MCU. She had an insane kind of like footprint and location and menu design and structure, and everything was going to be great, and she was going to offer benefits to her employees, and the work hours were going to be great, and XYZ. I don't know if the audience was there for that. But like, to have a brand that already has an active audience, and people want to go to the Lexus restaurant because they love Lexus, or whatever brand that happens to be, I just think that it can be a really helpful symbiotic relationship. And I thank you for sharing your thoughts on it. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to be caught up in the machine anymore. Right?
Yeah.
Like, I think I would say food is my life, or a good chunk of my life, but you can still have room to do other things, right? And like, figuring out how to get that balance. And I'm almost saddened by people who don't have that balance. Like these I talked about before, like when COVID hit, all these people were on Twitter saying like, oh, another Friday night, like not working the line. Like, I wish I was with my homies. And to me, that's like kind of sad. Like,
Yeah.
You had nothing else that like filled your life. Like, Friday off, like, woohoo, like, go, like, what have you not done on a Friday night for the past 10 years? And I've just never, I don't know, I'm not a lifer in that from that standpoint. Like, I just always wanted to find some balance. So anytime that I can work in an operation or run an operation, but also like redefining, like, what is a restaurant? Like, what does that mean? Does it mean it has to be a brick and mortar that you own that people come to, or can you bring the restaurant to them? My tagline for my personal chef business is the best restaurant in town is in your house, because I've wanted to brand myself, not just as a personal chef, but the restaurant experience of like, there's going to be linens on your table. It's going to be preset with silverware. I'm going to cook everything fresh there, and just kind of redefine what a restaurant is. And can we work as a whole on redefining that, just as we're redefining what a chef is, can we redefine what a restaurant is?
And for everybody listening, like, I hope the message that's getting relayed is that because you choose that, it doesn't make you lesser than, right? Like, there's a quote that says, it's from a guy who hosts a podcast called Modern Wisdom, and it's something to the effect of, when your satisfaction that you take from your work is derived from the amount of time that you put towards that work, it ceases to become a good measure kind of for how you're thinking about, like, and that totally maps to these people who, like, the satisfaction they get is not from the feedback that Table 13 said, or it's not from the fact that they got to tell one of their line cooks that they did a really good job today, or it's not from the fact that they got to work with this really cool fish this week. It's from the satisfaction, weirdly, comes from, and you hear it in how they talk about their work and their life, is that it comes from this place of how close to 100 can I get my working hours this week, or like how many consecutive days did I go without taking a day off. And when that becomes a point of pride and something that you want to use as something that you wear as a badge of honor, I think that
I haven't taken a sick
really
day
harmful.
in 2 years.
Yeah, something like that. But from what I'm hearing you say is that there's value in being able to define what it is that fulfills you in your work and potentially outside of your work. Something a previous guest on the podcast calls life-work balance. He flips it, which I think is a really cool way to talk about. That's Aaron Teckelby, for everybody who hasn't listened to that episode. But Yeah, we're in agreement. The place I want to take it next, you grew up with a very different type of chef media project landscape. And a lot of that, like I mentioned, was based on like technological limitations or this kind of like top-down gatekeepership. It wasn't as easy to kind of like break out or produce your own stuff. But I'm sure that you have peers who didn't make the decision to start a podcast or move their business online, or like you said, they're still stuck in what you mentioned as like the game or the hamster wheel. I'm curious, what is it about your either personality or background or some other thing in you that caused you to want to do this?
Yeah, I think being a extreme introvert, and just like not being popular growing up. So like I was, kind of nerdy. I don't like sports. I mean, like I watch soccer a little. Like I just grew up in a town where it's, like you played sports, you were cool. Like I was a Boy Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout, like not super popular. I was always the quietest person in the room. And I think like with the invent of the internet, you could almost have like this alter ego, right? Like you create an avatar of yourself. I mean, I was in college, and it was like 95 when we got on AOL. And I was like, this is amazing because I can like create this screen name and kind of like say whatever I want and no one knows who I am. And that translated over when social media started. Like I didn't feel like I remember being in culinary school and every time I had an idea, like I was just steamrolled and just like, nobody wanted to hear from me. And that, people like us, that makes you not want to share even more. So when I started my blog, I was still working my job. And I was really afraid of like being found out. Like I didn't want anyone to know I was doing this thing, especially as I started to turn it into, I wanted to have a personal chef business. So like my avatar was me with like a pig's head. Like I had butchered a pig's head. I'm like holding it in front of my face and it was just Perfect Little Bites. And the whole thing is like Perfect Little Bites was this chef in Maryland. I didn't even put the city I lived in. And I blogged and I started to get like really great feedback. And then, I started Twitter in like 2007 and all these chefs started following me. I mean, I'm going to name drop a little bit like Rene Redzepi and Sean Brock and like Massimo Bottura and these people. I was like, that built some self-confidence in me, but I still didn't feel like I could come out and say who I was. I felt like an imposter. Like people thought that I had a restaurant. Like I just said, like, I'm a chef. That was it. It wasn't that I was a chef at a restaurant, that I was a personal chef. I was a chef at a retirement community. And I felt like if anyone knew that, then I would be discredited. So for years, I was just Perfect Little Bites. It was the guy with the raw pig's head in front of his face. And I just, I was showcasing what I was doing at these retirement communities. But I felt like if people knew where I worked, they would discredit it before I could even tell them, no, but like I'm doing sous vide and I'm doing like butchery and I'm doing this cool stuff. So I just had this alter ego. And then I would, like go to the Star Chefs Congress in New York City. And that's where I would like one by one let people know like, oh, yeah, like I'm Chris, I'm the guy behind Perfect Little Bites. So I could put a face with the avatar. And finally, I just had to be comfortable with like, this is who I am. But I've always kind of hidden behind the walls of the internet and an avatar and a screen name. And it took me a long time to kind of come out. And people still say to me now, like, you don't seem like an introvert. Like you've got a podcast and a blog and this huge following. It's like, yeah, but that took a long time to get there, like 20 years.
Do you have you done days when you do like, I mean, today was like semi one of those days for you, right? Like you did the panel into a podcast interview. It's very draining. Do you?
Yeah, no, totally. It is definitely draining because there are days where I'll do like 2 or 3 podcasts in a row and I feel like I'm as exhausted doing that as a full cook day, where it's like I'm on and I prepare, when I do a podcast, I've got a whole bunch of questions and I've researched the guests and I'm ready to go. And then I might only have an hour between interviews and then jumping to a panel. Like I was on a panel literally that ended a half an hour before this podcast and that was an hour long. And it's exhausting in a way that's very different than standing all day and cooking, which I also did because I have an event in a couple of days. So this morning I spent the day prepping physically, cooking, standing, working. But the process of just being quote unquote on all day, like kind of talking, is draining. I enjoy it, especially during pandemic COVID times where I'm not having conversations with people as much. But yeah, it's exhausting for me.
To get back to the pseudonymous writing and content creation, I want to double click on that a little bit, only because I think that as people are trying to find their voice, as people are trying to just get started, or even just test and see if this is right for them, like if they actually do like hitting that publish button. Like, do you have any other advice for people who are thinking that this needs to be under my name? And I think that the common misconception is, I'll build this thing, I'll get to 1,000 followers, and I'll come out. So people will know who I am, and then no one will want to follow me, or I'm going to have to start from zero again under Justin Khanna's thing, whereas previously it was this other concept.
I mean, I think it depends on what you're worried about. You know, for me, I worked for a big corporate company. I was afraid that they were going to say things like I was, sharing recipes that I wasn't entitled to. Someone, a corporate executive chef at the company I worked for, told me that if I wrote a cookbook while I was employed, even in my off time, that they would physically own it, that you were never off, that even if you were home and on your days off, if you created it, was their content. So, thinking like that, like I had employees, I'm trying to build a personal chef business, and I was afraid I would have employees of course I had employees who didn't like me. And it's like, are they going to go on my Yelp page and give me all 1-star reviews? Like, that's why I was anonymous. But I will say that my personal chef business did not grow until I came out. And it makes total sense in hindsight. Like, no customer really wants to hire me if they don't even know what I look like or know my name, right? Like, how are you building a customer base? But it's funny, I'm friends with Rich Sheesh, who wrote, Koji Alchemy, and he still, his name was Jean Doe on Twitter. And I think that's still his handle. That's not his name. But, I got an email from him the other day. It's like, wow, are you really you have a book out with your real name? Are you still using that as your pseudonym? So there's been a lot of people who've tried to create content under a pseudonym. I think it just depends on, why is it you feel like you can't come out and let people know who you are?
Do you have anything, the person who, and I know you can empathize with this, which is why I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I had this, thank goodness the feedback never came through, but I can only imagine the things that were probably said behind my back of people who saw initial YouTube videos that I produced, or, and people might be getting these things said directly to them, or like you said, superiors of yours threatening your job, or, weird backhanded comments in the locker room, or, weird DMs or comments from old coworkers on your videos. Like, is there anything that you have to say to people from where you're at now that if you received that kind of, feedback, when you were early on, that would have helped things at that time?
I mean, get comfortable with criticism, because that's just the internet age we live in. I mean, I remember the very first time anything I had done, I had a recipe that was published on Garden and Guns website, which was huge for me. Big fan. I'd never had anything, and I'd done a bourbon cocktail, which I thought was super interesting. And Jed Portman thought was so interesting that he, put online, and they put it on their Facebook page, and the very first comment was like, what a bunch of crap, like, why would you waste good bourbon on a garbage cocktail like that? And you're like, oh, really the first thing I ever put out through a major publication, the very first comment. And it's just unfortunately that's the nature of the internet. But if you can take constructive criticism, it's like the podcast, looking back, when I started, I knew nothing about audio engineering. It's not my background. I just put out a show that I thought was going to be fun. And there's someone in my city, and he has a food truck, and he's a friend. And I bumped into him in Costco, and we were just talking about the podcast. He said, I stopped listening. The audio quality isn't good. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, I tried listening to it, and I just it hurts my ears. I just don't like it. And that, it's true. If I go back and listen to the original podcast, I didn't know anything about audio leveling. I didn't do any content editing. It was just 3 people sitting in a room with microphones, and we recorded, and then we hit publish. So can you really take the constructive criticism, really digest what people are saying and say, yeah, I think you're right. I totally agree with you. The audio quality was not where it should have been. And that's not something that I loved, but we started, and please give it a listen now, because I think we've progressed, versus the oh, that's a garbage recipe, you can kind of, dismiss that. But I think just getting comfortable with all that comes with putting yourself out there, because 99% of the people never publish anything at all. And it's 1% of people who do. And just like, you have to take everything that comes with that.
And it's also may or may not translate to this greater self-awareness that you get through taking feedback overall, right? Like you and I are talking about, like, you get this feedback on this food related item, beverage item that you created, and then there's also like these media projects, and it's almost like I like that kind of stuff, like the beginner mentality. Like when I started video editing, it was very much so like it felt like cooking, from the sense of like taking something raw, applying creative energy towards it, and then result and immediate feedback. Like you watch the clip back and the cut is wrong, so you just kind of change it a little bit. In the same way that you re-season a sauce, it's exactly kind of like, it felt the same to me. And it's almost like there's this trepidation towards content creation that well, it has to be that self-talk and feedback that you give to your content work that you would never have given to yourself when you were first starting off in food or bartending or whatever, but for some reason you do it to yourself with content, that I think is just so interesting in the industry.
Well, it's because the content's around forever, right? Like if I work in a restaurant or a personal chef dinner, if I go cook for people and I make a dinner and it's not great, like it sucks for them, but like nobody else is going to know, right? But now, like those podcasts, like what do I do with them? I mean, I've released 82 podcast episodes now, like 1 through 10 probably aren't great at all. And it's like, do I leave them? Do I delete them? Like, do you want to leave them out there so people can see the evolution? Can they still pick up some nuggets of wisdom because I had an amazing guest and I was just bad? Like, now that I know how to edit, should I go re-edit them? Whereas like with food, it's one and done. Like a dish is either good or bad and you put it out, it's consumed and it's done, and then you can move on with your day. So I think with the content, whether it's, audio, video, photos, you have more options to delete, edit it, or whatever you're going to do. And I think that's the difference.
Perfect segue into my next kind of overarching theme. I want to talk about scale. And I'm using that as the umbrella by which I want to host this part of the conversation. And this semi picks up from our last conversation where we discussed leverage, like a Naval-ism. But effectively, I've been playing around with this idea that food doesn't scale. And to define our terms a little bit better, I'm talking about the type of scale where there's a marginal decrease or effectively net zero cost to replicate a entree or a scoop of ice cream or a canapé. That doesn't exist yet, right? Like we don't have a machine where, again, there's no marginal cost to create more. Like you still have to buy the flour or the sugar or the milk or the pork belly or the avocados. And yes, I think we get caught up with this idea that wholesale pricing or getting a case discount or whatever is scale. But no one has a food business where they're effectively saying, once I hit 100 customers in seats, it's pure profit from there. In the same way that, like, if I'm going to put a podcast out for 1 people, it effectively works for 1,000. The food cost is the same every single time someone orders their burrito bowl, for example. And so in my mind, what scales might be the systems, most often exemplified in food businesses like franchises, for example. Would you agree that food doesn't scale? And I have a follow-up question, but I hate when interviewers ask 2 questions in one. So would you agree that food doesn't scale?
Yeah. I mean, there's some economy of scale with like size of parties. Like I talk about, like I do dinners for 2 to 20. And if I go out and do a dinner for 2 and I charge $100 a head, that's $200. I would rather do a dinner for 10 and make 1,000, and it's not that much more expensive. Like I get a better profit because it's the time, right? Because the time is essentially the same. Like it doesn't take much more time to cook for 10 than it does for 2. And especially if it's one day, like I go out and do one dinner. But yeah, obviously, if you're buying ribeye steak, if I have 2 people, it costs X. And if I have 10 people, well, I still have to buy 8 more portions of ribeye. I might save on the fact that like the time where I could do more events, like I could do more days of events. I'd rather do 1 day of 10-person parties than, 5 days of 2-person parties. So yes, I agree. Whereas with the podcast, I put the podcast out and whether 1 person or 1,000 people listens to it, it's the same. It costs me the same time, the same processing, editing fees and everything. So yes.
So you semi-touched on it, but how do you think about, and you can approach this from how you divvy up your time versus what you like to prioritize versus what you see as kind of like the end goal for, like, in my ideal work day or my ideal work week, I, Chris, would like to be working on these sorts of projects. How do you think about doing work that scales versus work that doesn't scale? Because there's value in both, in my opinion, but I'd be curious to hear.
Yeah, that's been a big one for me, especially during the past year. I've really started thinking about, like, do I even really want to be cooking professionally that much anymore? Like, how valuable to me and to the world is my content creation? I find that I've really gone deep into the podcasting thing and the Chefs Without Restaurants community and almost put the personal chef thing on the back burner almost to a fault. I mean, there's been times where, like, I've just, like, blipped out. Like, someone sent me a request for dinner and I didn't get back to them in a timely manner. And, like, I lost the gig just because my head was somewhere else. Like, I was unemployed for 11 weeks. So I really was like, well, what am I going to do? And while there was no personal chef business, I really went deep into the podcasting. And I just found that I loved it so much. And I really buried myself in the work of, like, how do I make a better quality show? How do I interview better? How do I, make the audio quality sound better? And now I'm just thinking, like, I would almost rather, like, could I work one day a week and make like $1,000 on a Saturday night and have 6 days where I'm just doing something else? Because I know that I can't scale the personal chef business the way that I would want to. I mean, I could hire chefs and send them out, but that's never what I've wanted to do. Like, that's why I got out of the restaurant business. I don't want to be a manager anymore. I don't want to send 5 chefs out on the same Saturday night and be managing menus. That's not fun for me. I cook because I love it. But now I found that I also like being, I don't want to call myself a storyteller. It's more the facilitator of storytelling, right? Like, I'm getting these great guests on my show and helping them tell their story and sharing it with the world. And if I could financially support myself doing that, I kind of feel like that's what I would want to do. And then maybe just go do one event a week just to keep my hands in the cooking. Or, if part of Chefs Without Restaurants is me getting paid via a Patreon or some kind of thing where I could just create recipes at home, like, maybe I don't even have to go out and cook for customers anymore. If I could be in my kitchen at home, create dishes, photograph them, share the recipes, and get paid for that, like, I think that's something I'd be comfortable with.
Well, the first time you do it, and when I say it, meaning do something that truly scales, like, you do something, and whether 5 people sign up or 100 people sign up, it's the same output from you. It feels like a glitch in the matrix, man. Like, the first time you make money online versus what Naval calls trading your time for money. It's honestly like, how can you ever unsee that? Like, how can you ever, like, you're constantly comparing what you do at this trading time for money thing versus this other thing, which is, the Jack Butcherism of, like, build once, sell twice, is what he talks about.
Yeah, one of the things I started doing was I started using Instacart for the first time ever. And it just, because, like, I don't know, I think this chef thing in you is like, I need to pick out all my ingredients. I need to do this and that. And going back to Naval, thinking about, he talks about this, like, aspirational hourly wage. And it's like, when I think about the hours that I was spending going to the grocery store, because I was really trying to be lean and have a good profit margin as far as food costs. So it's like, I would go to Aldi to buy X, Y, and Z. And then I would drive across town and go to Wegmans to buy X, Y, and Z. And then I would go to Common Market to buy all this. But I was spending like 5 or 6 hours grocery shopping. Like, what is that time worth? And then when COVID came, where, like, I was kind of worried about, going into stores and stuff, I just started doing it. I was like, I'm never going to go grocery shopping again. Like, the margin of, I call it error, like letting a grocery store clerk pick out the ribeye steaks for a party, like, I'm okay with that. Like, that's within the realm. Like, if I look at it in the car and it's garbage, I can always go exchange it. But, like, what am I really saving? I'm saving like 15 hours a week. Like, if I have all these parties, I'm saving a ridiculous amount of time by having someone do that. And just really start thinking about how I spend my time and how does the time kind of fit into the equation as well, and not just the fixed cost of, like, a product.
I mean, you mentioned this word of satisfaction as well. Like and I find that there are different types of satisfaction, and maybe this is something that I have yet to learn, and I will learn as I grow older and do this a little bit more. But I feel a different type of satisfaction doing food related work, from the sense of like when my company produces an event and I get to cook the dinner. That's a different satisfaction than putting out this podcast, and the accompanying clips and the Instagram content for it will be. And I think that I need, and I don't mean to turn this into a therapy session, but I'm hoping to get maybe some of your insight to people that might be feeling something the same, is that like, it doesn't, the satisfaction comes from, like, I need to be better at finding satisfaction in scalable work. You know what I mean? Because like you're saying, it gives you more time with your family. It allows you to reach more people. You're not completely like gobbling up resources to make your money. And you're doing good, like you're doing good things. It's not like I'm like scaling my install malware on old people's computer business. You know what I mean? Like I'm doing good stuff. So yeah, I don't know. Like how can I get better at that? Like finding the satisfaction in that.
And I think some of it is like, how much is it that people around you don't feel like what you're doing is a real job? Because I think it's still emerging. So, like I have a neighbor across the street who I love, and she works in the health field. And all week she's been doing conferences, and she's doing conferences with all these well-known people. And that's like acceptable, right? But when I say that, like, I have a Clubhouse chat today with all these people in the food world, I think people don't think it's a real thing, even though, I'm on a panel with, 3 chefs who've been on Top Chef, and these people who are really well-known in the food world. People look at that and say like, oh, that's not like a real thing. He's talking on a Clubhouse panel where like I'm sitting doing this like infectious disease conference or something. My in-laws live with me, and they're from a very different generation. I still don't think they understand what I do. When I say my work today is like I'm locking myself in the office from 5 to 8 o'clock because I have a Clubhouse chat and then a podcast. Like, but that's brand building and leveraging this thing. And I think you have to be comfortable just saying like, this is what I do. People might not understand it. And I still have challenges with that. Like neighbors, when it's like, oh, I got to go, I have a podcast. I don't think they understand that that's work, because they don't understand how you can make money from that. They don't understand how that's a job. And like being comfortable with like, yeah, your neighbors might think that you're like a bum or something, and that's really hard.
Seth Godin talks about this concept of building there's 2 reasons that you seek out to build something. One is to see something exist in the world that does not exist prior to you making that decision. And the other reason is to create an ideal day for yourself. And I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, that you see Perfect Little Bites and the podcast and Chris as a brand as being able to fulfill the latter. True or false?
Yeah, true. I mean, yeah. I want to have like a life that's filled with things. I want to be able to travel, and I want to go to art museums and spend time with my family and eat. And like, life is not work, and life is not, 1 or 2 or 3 things. It's like 40 things. And like, whatever is going to get me to where I feel fulfilled in life. And again, it all comes back to, for me, so much about like, identifying with a career and a job and like societal norms. And I feel like I'm still trying to break free from that. It's like, I was really happy the first time I made money through affiliate marketing. And I told a very good friend, and she literally said like, shame on you. Like I was shamed. And these are people who they were good friends, and I've kind of had to step away from because like they didn't understand what it was. And I'm like, no, like all I do is I have an Amazon page and I link to like things I love. And when people click on them, I get paid. And you would have thought that I was like selling child porn, like in their opinion, that it was just like the dirtiest thing. And I was like, I don't understand, but that's just how it is. And, I was like, I don't know if it means I have to work less, like work in the traditional sense, then like, why are you hating on that? And I just think some people don't get it. And I think it's maybe like a jealousy, like you hate your life and your job and the fact that you're working 80 hours a week to make ends meet. And I get, last week I got a $300 referral bonus because someone signed up for something that I recommended. Like, that's working smarter, not harder, right? Like, don't hate.
Especially because like people see that as like, oh, $300, that's so much money. There's got to be something shady behind that. But 9 times out of 10, the company that's benefiting from that referral has seen, I think the economics is something like in a typical affiliate program, it's like you're looking for like 5 to 9x return on referral, so it's like whatever happened there, like that company's just fine, like you did them a favor, they're adequately compensating you for it, and yeah, so that's an interesting piece of feedback for someone to give you. I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, I think it's like old school versus new school, and both of my parents have passed away, and I'd be really interested to see, like, my dad is very old school, and I think a lot of this, I don't know if I'd still be doing it like if my parents were both alive, because I do think that a lot of people are, in the shadow of their parents and looking for that. I mean, again, I do have a little of that. My in-laws live with me, and I feel like, they're not my parents, but I have to, their daughter, I'm supposed to be taking care of her, and I want them to, like, the reassurance of like, yes, I have like a real job. Like, it might not be what you've always thought of as a real job, but like I have ways of bringing income. And I just, my mother-in-law say, like, I still don't understand, like, how are you making money from the podcast? Like, it's really hard for people of that generation especially to understand how you can make income from these things.
To talk semi-tactically, if you're comfortable talking about it, like podcast host to podcast host, as you're thinking about monetizing, are sponsorships attractive to you? I know you just launched a Patreon, and I'm super happy to have you speak about that, and it's obviously going to be linked down below for people. How are you thinking about monetizing? Have you seen things that are attractive where you're like, yeah, that I can see myself doing that? Or
I think if it's a brand that makes sense, for sure. I would love to be 100% Patreon supported. We're not there. I know, that's something you've talked about, and I think it's an intro to your show. Like, I don't drink soda, and if Diet Coke wanted to throw me some money, that's not the right fit. But, there are things, what are the things that I already use and pay for myself? Is it, the aprons that I wear or a food product that I buy? And, I've actually taken a course on growing and scaling your podcast, which has been really great. And a big component of that is how to monetize. And there's a lot of different ways. And for me, my numbers aren't there. So I think finding someone who you have a great relationship where you say, like, be honest, like, listen, my numbers, my downloads are not at that. These companies are looking for like 3,000 downloads an episode. Like, I'm clearly not there. I'm not going to make any money on this. Like, well, for every 1,000 downloads, you'll give me, $10. I just want you to take a leap of faith and kind of say, listen, I have dedicated listeners. It's very niche. I know who they are. And, if you think that you're a good fit, I'd love to have you. And I'm putting together, now you have to have like a pitch deck and like a media package and all that stuff, something I haven't totally been comfortable with. But, finding the brands that work with what I'm doing. I've had a lot of great support. Like, the past year, I literally just said, like, my Venmo is this and my PayPal is this, and if you want to support the show. And I have people like my old sous chef will just randomly send me $200 and just say, like, loving the show, here's $200 to keep you going. Like, I paid for my show last year just through crowd support, not even through a Patreon. Nobody got any physical thing. They didn't get a reward. There was no structure. It was just like, I would just get Venmo, and I still, every couple of days, I'll get, like $10 from this person who said, oh, this episode was great. Here's $10. Like, I really love that, and that I've been able to cover the costs. The challenge is that's not like a profit. I mean, talking numbers, I was a chef making like $70,000 a year, and I left to start my own business, like, and I'm making money as a personal chef, but I'm not, I would love to not only cover the costs of my show, but make some money to live on. And I don't know when that's going to come, but, I think nothing good really comes overnight. I mean, I've been doing the podcast for 16 months now, and that's very early. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who have successfully monetized, and they're telling me that I'm ahead based on where they were at the same time frame. So I'm optimistic about that.
That's awesome. I think my audience of hungry learners would hate if I didn't ask you what course you took, just so that you can just, if people want to explore that, they can know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called Grow the Show. Kevin Schmidlin. So he has a podcast called Grow the Show. So he's someone who had a podcast called Philly Who, which he's a Philadelphian and he wanted to interview people from Philly. And, it really resonated with me. His story was, much like many of ours. You build and grow this thing and then you get to a plateau and like you're not getting any more listeners. And he just like reached out to me. It was no pressure. He sent an email and said, hey, I've seen that you have a podcast. I have a podcast about building and growing your podcast. If you're interested, give a listen. I just released 3 episodes and I listened to it and it really connected with me as far as like, there's so many podcasting courses and a lot of them, I'm like, I don't know, that doesn't sound like my thing, but I was like, oh, those are my exact problems. And then we talked about it and he said, well, I've got this course, and I signed up for the course and it's a program of like how to build and grow a following. And it's at your own pace. So there's like 20 modules. They're all video recorded. There's resources that come along with it. We have 2 calls a week that we're on. And, now he's on Clubhouse and hosting shows a couple times a week. There's a great public Facebook group called Grow the Show, and anyone can join that group. And then for the people who are members, we have one called Grow the Show Inner Circle. But just like realistic, and he is giving away so much of that stuff for free. He talks about watering hole engagement, and targeted daily engagement is the core of his program, whereas like, who are your target listeners, and go to those places. So like join 30 Facebook groups and engage with people, and don't go and be like, hey, I've got the Chefs Without Restaurant podcast. Like I'm going in personal chef groups and just giving my advice as a personal chef, and then make sure your Facebook profile is optimized. So when people click on and see who you are, they know that you have a podcast, and do that over and over, and creating like Excel spreadsheets where it's like, who are your top 100 guests? And every day engage with like 10 of the people who you want on your show. And then who are 50 people in media who you think, you want to be in their publication, and engage with them, 10 or 15 of them, and spend an hour a day, just an hour a day of engaging with people who are in your top 100, people who are in the media, and people in these watering holes, and your show is going to grow. And just continuously doing that. And, he teaches you other things like how to optimize your link tree, or how to optimize your Facebook, header and things like that. But it's really based on just engaging with who your core audience is, who your potential advertisers are, and doing that. And it's a great course. And, for the amount of money I spent on that, I think it's well worth it. I mean, I think any time you want to build and grow a business, you have to spend money somewhere. And this was a good place.
Well, especially if it gives you that, like, I'm just such a big fan of like the person 1 or 2 rungs above you on the ladder, reaching their hands down and helping you. Like that's so valuable, because it's like, it feels so practical. Like the advice, especially as the information changes so fast in sectors like this, like just media production being internet content stuff. Yeah, huge fan. So thank you for sharing that. The important piece that struck me the first time I heard it, and I don't know if you have been thinking about similar numbers, is this idea of I'm going to botch the stat, but I'm going to say a stat, and I think it might resonate. It's something like, if you have more than 10,000 downloads per episode, you're in the top like 3% of podcasters. Which is insane, because you're used to like seeing 150,000 followers on Instagram, and it's like, that's where I need to get to per episode. And it's really like, you don't need to have that much. Like the podcasting space is, one, it's still so new. Like it's evident by the deals that you see floating around in the big space. But 2, it's like, to your point, it's such a niche targeted audience. It's literally like this relationship, this one-on-one connection you have with the host and the show.
So like I released a podcast episode yesterday. I got 158 downloads of that, which I don't think is a lot, but it put me at number 118 on iTunes in the food and beverage. Like that's
nuts.
That's not that, that's not that much. I can consistently say that I'm a top 100 iTunes podcaster in the food and beverage is pretty oversaturated. I mean, there's a lot in the food and beverage category, and to see yourself like right below like cooking issues or something that I think is like a really well-known, I think, like Andrew Talks to Chefs was like maybe 8 above me yesterday. It's like, that was only with like 158 downloads yesterday. And there's days that I'll get like 300 downloads on an episode. It doesn't take that much in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I know people who say like, oh, I got, 12 downloads yesterday. And that's a reality for a lot of people with podcasts. But you don't have to have this crazy number like, 50,000 downloads to be in the top.
This can be a quick hits if you want, because I do have a couple questions before I move into some more rapid fire things. Clubhouse, Twitter Spaces, Instagram just launched this thing where you can video chat with 3 of your friends and stream it live, and it's their competitor to Clubhouse effectively. Have you enjoyed it? Do you see potential in it? Do you see some flaws, or one is you see more long-term potential in than the other? Because I think as people that are listening to this are possibly thinking about growing an audience, or they see these new platforms in the same way that maybe they saw their friend just completely blow up on TikTok and they're like, oh, I can do this. I missed that boat. I can do it on Clubhouse. What are your kind of thoughts on that whole space?
Yeah, I went hard on Clubhouse, so I'm going to stay there for now. I mean, just to put numbers out, not in a brag sort of way. I mean, I've been on there about a month and I have 1,200 followers. I launched my own Chefs Without Restaurants club, and I have I'm coming up on 300 members in my club. And I feel like that's just one of those things where now I've got down, I'm an old guy. I love AOL chat rooms. So it is like a throwback to that. Now being an audio guy, I don't feel like video is my strength. I just don't think I have the camera skills. I could spend time working on it. Food photography is not where I'm going to be. And I don't want to invest in all this video equipment. So the audio is something now with the podcast I've been comfortable with. And I've really grown to the Clubhouse thing. So I went hard, really early on. I was staying up till 2 a.m. in rooms and just, kind of sharing what I knew and engaging with people. And now I look, there's really well-known chefs, and you do feel kind of good, even though you shouldn't get caught up in the numbers. Damn, does that Michelin-star chef, Jose Andreas followed me. I woke up one Saturday morning and he had followed me, and he had 128 followers and I had 700 at the time. I was like, this is amazing. And then we were in a chat room together. But just, I feel like it's somewhere where I got on pretty early and was able to scale pretty quickly. And I think it will, as all these things come out and our attention is divided, I think people are going to pick where they want to spend their time. But at least I was able to grow and scale fast. And I found that so many people then followed me on Instagram because of that. And then they found the podcast. I mean, for a couple of weeks, I've been the #1 food podcast in Nigeria, the number one.
Nuts.
And that comes down to I connected with a lot of Nigerian chefs through Clubhouse. And I can directly see a correlation. Now, when I look at the stats of where I'm charting, it's way more global. And that's because on Clubhouse, there's been a much bigger global community that I've been engaging with. And I look and say, every week when I release an episode, I'm charting in the top 200s of a dozen countries. Whereas before it was maybe 1 or 2. And now it's the US and Spain and Netherlands and New Zealand and Nigeria and Ghana. And I know those are just directly coming over from the connections I made on Clubhouse.
You brought up a point that I want to touch on. And this might not be brief. We might go for another hour on this because it's a really big, and it's like a thread that I'm noticing throughout the last 2 conversations that we've had with you. And it's something that I think gets tossed around a lot. I think a lot of gurus kind of talk about it as this thing that is the pinnacle. And I notice this self-awareness in you, which is you bring it up in so many of these things as you're talking about how you want to structure your food life, maybe I'm not the video guy, maybe it helps guide your decision making. And I'm really, really a huge fan of people getting better at decision making. How do you cultivate that as someone who is potentially feeling like they are a ship in a storm, whatever that analogy is? They're just they're just guided around wherever the winds take them. You've really seemed to have found your footing. How can people do that?
It's the Gary V, right? It's
correct.
The self-awareness, but moving fast. There's things that I'm really interested in, and it's where do I want to spend my time? Knowing that my photography, I think it's feeling like you're already behind the ball of so many people and realizing you maybe don't have the skill set. I look at food photographers who are just amazing. It's I don't understand ISO and aperture and camera settings. I don't have the backdrops for that. I don't have the light. How long is it going to take me to teach myself photography and then purchase the equipment and do that to even be a fraction of where they are. Like, I'm not even gonna make any dent in that space. So like, what
And it's
am
being
I
okay.
doing well?
It's
And
being okay with that. It's being
Yeah,
okay with that.
and just saying that, like, I'm not gonna have this Instagram that is very cultivated look of like a food blogger. Like, that's just not gonna be my thing. Like, I'll put out photos of my food, but I'm not going to get 10,000 followers at Perfect Little Bites because of the pictures of the food I put out. Like, it is what it is, and being comfortable with it. But what am I really good at, and going deep into that. And then because I'm good at it, or I'm really interested in it, I can move so much faster.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, and it's going to be so hilarious if this has already happened, but like, you could be hosting a clubhouse room or someone is looking for a photographer for their cookbook. You happen to connect the two, and that photographer reaches out to you and says, hey, if you need any photography stuff, like this is a huge deal for me. Thank you so much. I'd love to like repay you in some way, shape, or form. And then you're like, I got a talented photographer for my food now, you know? Like,
well, I think being, I want to be a connector or a super connector. And I think that's one of the things is, like, I love community is what it comes down to, right? Like, that's what Chefs Without Restaurants is all about. I built the community that I didn't see existing either in a physical space where I lived or really online, where it was just like having the camaraderie and helping people because you liked helping people and wanted to see them grow. So anytime, it takes work. Like, people will reach out to me and say, I'm looking for someone to do meal prep in DC. Like, that's not my thing. And I could easily say, sorry, that's not my thing. But I say, sorry, that's not my thing. If you want to fill out this questionnaire and send it back to me, I will connect you with people who can do that for you. And then I do, and I expect nothing in return. I don't say to people like, well, for a 10% fee or a $20 fee, like, I just do it. And that's how I've kind of wanted to live my life, is just like helping people. And I do believe in that karma, or whatever you want to call it, that will come around, and the long tail of these connections. It's like with the podcast. People say, wow, you just started and you have all these big names. It's like, yeah, but I became friends with them like on Twitter in 2007. Like, it's very long. Like, before there was even an idea of like Michael Twitty and I have been talking for a decade on Twitter, right? Like,
but it's all of a sudden an overnight success.
Yeah. So I can go in for the ask and say, do you want to come on my podcast? Because it seems like we know each other, and that was just because I was genuinely interested in him and what he was doing, and became, internet friends. And it paid off in the respect of now the ask is easy because I built all these relationships. So I can just, in my podcasting class, I talk about, well, I'm going through my Dream 100 really quickly. And everyone's surprised. It's like, but these are people, like, I hate to say leveraging the relationships I've built, but they're people who I've reached out to over the course of 10 years who I feel like I've become friends with. And now I can say, hey, do you want to come on my podcast? It's not like I'm reaching out to a complete stranger when I do it. And it's so much easier.
A thing I'll add that I think I'm noticing that you do really well that might help people in their process of gaining more self-awareness is it's like when you're starting, you haven't done enough to have enough data. Like, you haven't garnered enough information to know, I like this, I'm good at this, this makes people happy. I don't really shine when I do that kind of stuff. But you seem to, and I hope that people can take away from this idea of like looking backwards at things that you've done and identifying, like, so many people are just like on to the next job, on to the next restaurant, on to the next city, on to the next relationship maybe. But like really taking the time to reflect and that, I think, like cultivating that, I think might be the value add that when you get to that, because it's backwards until you hit a point when all of a sudden you can project that forwards and use it to help make your decisions. And that's when it's like, oh, now this is useful, but you have to have this backlog.
I can put this all back to like one event and how it started, like like the chain reaction. And I can say, like, this is the person I met that turned me on to this, that did this. And when I look at that, it's really crazy. And it goes back to like Dave Arnold. I took a cooking course. Him and Nils Noren did a class at FCI. And I asked my job if they would pay for me to go. And I went, and I was kind of burnt out. Like, I don't even, this was like, 12 years ago, maybe. I don't even know if I wanted to be a chef anymore. I was just looking for something different. I went out, like, I wasn't on social media at all, but like I met him, but then he convinced me, he's like, you need to get on Twitter and follow these people, and like introduced me to like Alex at Ideas in Food and like all these blogs and stuff. And it opened my eyes to this whole new world. And then like I find Alex at Ideas in Food, and like I'm really interested in them, and I helped him with some projects, and he actually quoted me on their blog. Like there's a blog post that like links back to Perfect Little Bites like a
Dope.
long time ago, and I started following all these people, and it just like snowballed, and it goes down. It could go down this rabbit hole of like, then I met people through Star Chefs, and then like that allowed me to like write for Star Chefs, which, allowed me to do all these other things. And it just kind of goes back to like this one moment that kind of like opened my eyes. And it would be, again, really easy to say like it just happened, but it didn't just happen. It was like being very aware kind of in the moment and just kind of pulling on the string and just, following that along.
Our segment we did as the conversation that you hosted on private chef work, people seem to like it. People seem to enjoy it. So I'd be curious, just if you wouldn't mind riffing with me a little bit on a little bit more of that, and if there's any more kind of like, and you can go either direction, like general thought processes and kind of like overarching big decisions you can make as you're thinking about private chef stuff, or little tactical, like this is how I write my emails kind of, or how I set up my tools bag to be in someone's home, kind of advice for people who are wanting to get more private chef work, or they've just started private chef work and they're feeling a little bit like out of their element.
Yeah, for me, and it's still something I struggle with, is I would say like knowing what you're good at, knowing what you can execute, and knowing when to say when. Like I have a customer this weekend, and maybe it's because I'm cooking in an Airbnb I've been at before, but like I proposed a menu. She's like, well, we'd really like to have like, say, a risotto and scallops. I know I can't execute that. It's a 4-burner stove. I know this house. But even if I didn't, for me, if I go in as one person, knowing that like it's 13 people, like doing risotto for 13 people by myself on a home stove, and then you want a scallop on top of that where I have to like pan sear them all individually. And by the way, 3 minutes later, you want your entree and 2 sides. Like, and I think a lot of people bite off more than they can chew. And I think knowing how to have that conversation, say like, the reality is like I'm there cooking by myself. It's a home 4-burner stove. I know you go to restaurants and you have risotto and scallops, but like you have to realize it's not really something that's executable in like a home kitchen environment. I've had customers say like, oh, we would love oysters. And knowing that like I'm not an oyster guy. I don't like to eat them. I am really terrible at shucking them. Like I can muddle my way through for like a 2 to 4 top. But if I have 10 people, like just saying like that's not something I'm comfortable doing. And I think a lot of us as personal chefs, we want to say we can do everything. And knowing that like you can't be a master of all cuisines and techniques and everything, and it doesn't do you or your customer any good to bullshit them and say like, sure, I'll come and do like an oyster bar for a dozen people, and yeah, like let's do scallops and risotto right before you have your next 2 courses, and just being comfortable with like explaining to your customer. And I think they'll respect you for that and understand that.
Huge pro tip that you started that story with: Airbnbs as venues is dopeness. I don't know if
that's my moneymaker. That's my moneymaker. Like I tell all the people, like that's what has kept me in business.
And so you do that seeking out, and you send them a link of like, here's the Airbnb, it's available, here's the price, you guys need to book it, kind of thing?
So what happened is it really started with me putting it together when customers started finding me. So customers would just book an Airbnb, and then they would do the work of like searching for a chef. And I would go out to this place. I'm like, oh, you don't live here? It's an Airbnb. Can I get the info? So I'm there and I'm taking tons of photos. So making sure that like then I'm posting photos of the dinner on Instagram and tagging the Airbnb, and then following up with a DM or an email and saying like, I don't know if you know anything about me or that I was at your house, but I was there this weekend. I cooked for this party. I'm sure you could follow up with them. And they would say I was great, but like, I would love to be a referral. And, when someone books your house, can you, say if you need a chef, contact Chris. And then, so like to take that one step further, like, could you put my information on your website? Because, a lot of times an Airbnb owner will say, well, send me some cards. I'll put them in the house. Well, like, that doesn't work. Like when people get into the house, like they're not going to book me. They need that ahead of time. And I try and go at it from the extent of saying like, I think this is a value add that would help sell your place, because me, like my wife and I are foodies. And if we're looking to get away for the weekend and we look at your house, but you're in the middle of nowhere, I'm going to say to my wife, like, where are we going to be eating? Like, I would love to come to their website and see like, oh, they also have a chef like who they would recommend, and here's his website. So really being proactive in that approach and just kind of reaching out to them and kind of doing like cold calling. Again, something not comfortable with, just sending a random DM or email and saying like, I know you don't know anything about me, but here's kind of my resume. Look at my, reviews. And I would love if when people, booked your place, you sent them my info. And that has just been, it keeps the money coming in. All these people just say, yeah, I'm staying at Mortgage Hall in Middleburg. And they said, call Chris. And the benefit of having the Chefs Without Restaurants network is that it's also a gig sharing platform. So even though I am not going to do the wedding for 100 people, if you're staying at that venue, I can connect you with someone who can. So I really wanted to be the guy who could find a chef for whatever size event you're having in the DMV area. And, is there a way to scale that and take that nationally? If I'm not in Seattle, could I still somehow partner with Airbnbs in Seattle and connect them with you or something, and that's something I'm looking at.
That's the type of use of the word hustle that I actually really kind of like. That's dope, and I think that it's kind of gotten bastardized to this, you need to work 90 hours a week and just grind yourself in the ground and whatever. But like you pursuing opportunities like that. So there's a venue here in Seattle where I did the same thing, similar, not the same thing. It was, I wanted to host a pop-up. It was on a night when the restaurants that I had normally been working with they had service. Like it was a Friday or Saturday night. And I really wanted to do one on a Friday or Saturday night to test if this pop-up concept that I was doing would have legs on a Friday night. And so went on Airbnb, found this Airbnb in this neighborhood that's like, it's like a semi-residential neighborhood here in Seattle. And I go talk to the guy. I tell him, hey, and I was transparent on this. Like people have advice that go either way. Like don't tell them you're hosting a party. Because I think that what Airbnb hosts are really trying to avoid is like the 150 person one that's going to show up on the news kind of party, right? Like if you have a small dinner party, it is what it is. But I reached out to this guy and I said, hey, I noticed that you talked about renting this out for private events. He said something on the page. Gave me a tour of the space. He had an entire downstairs basement tiki bar set up that could have easily held like 40 to 50 people and was like fully built out and ready. And, had the pop-up series kept going, I would have worked with that venue tons and tons more. But he's like, hey, listen, when you do this again, just like call me directly. Don't book on Airbnb. I'll give you a better price because I don't have to pay Airbnb's fees. And we can just kind of like, but that element of like, nobody gave me that connection. Like I had to find that. I had to hustle for that. Like that's the use of that word that I actually enjoy. It's like seek out these opportunities, like know when to like semi break the rules or ask for what you want. That's what I hope that people are kind of taking away from this. I have one more point, but I'd be curious to hear if you have anything to share there.
Well, this is a kind of, it adds on to that, but it's a little different slant. So my Department of Health around here hates that. And they would say that is running an illegal underground restaurant.
Sure.
Because that is what I did. One time I have an Airbnb who I am very good friends with. And we hosted a dinner there. And we invited some influencers who didn't pay. And there was some media there. And some people paid. And she actually was at the dinner. She gave a tour of the Airbnb. We thought it was a great partnership. She didn't charge me. The people who were there wrote some amazing pieces. And then the Department of Health came at me because, it was the cover story in Frederick Magazine and in the Frederick News Post. And it looked like I was running an underground restaurant out of an Airbnb. And while they couldn't come after me, this woman who has an Airbnb also has other businesses that she runs on her property. And then that next week, I'm not saying this happened, but a government agent came on her property because allegedly someone placed a phone call saying that someone was illegally living on her property, which wasn't true. But when they were there, they found other things there. Nothing illegal, but just like things that weren't up to code. And I just felt like it was this like shakedown. Like basically the Department of Health was coming after me, but they couldn't come after me. So they were kind of like going up the chain to come after her to kind of set the signal that like anyone who kind of helps Chris facilitate this illegal restaurant is going to come under scrutiny. And I don't like that kind of business.
Emulsion podcast disclaimer: do your research, everybody. Like, make sure that you know.
It
like
varies from state to state.
Correct. Like
county to county. One of my old sous chefs is actually a Department of Health inspector in another county in Maryland, about 20 minutes from here. And I called him and asked him about this. And he ran it up the flagpole to his boss. And his boss said, if you are doing it in a private residence or an Airbnb, that is not our business, not our concern. We have bigger fish to fry. We don't care. If you want to rent a Airbnb in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and do this, it's fine. But if I do this in Frederick, they are coming after me.
That's us here too, at least in the time when I was doing those events, was if someone can walk off the street into that Airbnb and sit down in a seat and pay, that's not okay. If I sell tickets in advance and it's understood what the guest list is, they completely know what they're signing up for, that's considered a private ticketed event. Totally kosher.
See, we can't do the private ticketed events. If you publish online, they say it's not private. If you go on Instagram and say, DM me for tickets, if you make an Eventbrite, if you do any of that, they consider that a public event, because then literally anyone in the public can do it. And if it's a public event, then it is open to inspection by the Department of Health.
Fascinating.
Things I've learned.
Yeah, fascinating. Everybody do their research.
Which makes me not want to do that. It makes me just want to do private dinners.
Yeah, it kills certain types of business models and structures, and
But it goes back to, again, what is a restaurant and the evolving model. And I think, we have inspectors who are of a certain generation and a certain mindset of things. And they're, they don't like pop-ups and takeovers, because I've looked at, this restaurant, they're closed on a Monday night. Can I go in and do a dinner there? They don't like that. They don't want me doing a pop-up in a brewery, is a very old school mindset, because they're used to a very traditional model and they're not staying with the times, in my opinion.
The silly place where my mind goes, and this is like very much so a symptom of when I was at Per Se, they launched the sous vide program in New York, and the Department of Health there used them and their whole program as an example for what the HACCP plan should look like for all other restaurants that were wanting to do sous vide. And so, my hustle brain, right? That brain goes towards, if you're in a county that's like that, how could you approach that person and say, if I keep temperature records on everything that I'm working with, is that something that you guys would, how can you start that conversation to kind of tell them that you're willing to be more, because it's a liability thing for them, right? At the end of the day, they don't want the citizens going up in some sort of uproar that people are getting sick at this poke pop up because everybody, this company is serving spoiled fish to the citizens, and all of a sudden they're having to spend county resources to clean up your mess, right? That's what they're trying to avoid. And so
how is it different if I come into your house and do that?
Sure,
though? If
sure.
they're the same
Great
people,
question.
right? It's just semantics of it. If I come to
1000%.
Justin's house and he and his wife are having a party for 10 people and they all get sick, that's okay. And why is it different that you hired me privately versus me soliciting for customers?
Fascinating.
It's just very, there's so many nuances to all of it. And I just I don't have the patience for it, because so much of it is BS. And I mean, totally. I get it. I'm someone who's been ServSafe certified since 1994. I understand there's a lot of people, the pandemic for sure. I mean, there's a lot of people selling tacos out of their garage at their home because they're trying to make ends meet. I know there's a lot of things you need to police. I just am at the point in my career where I don't have the time or patience for that. I'm just kind of exhausted with it all.
A point I want to bring back to before we jump into rapid fire stuff is this idea of when you lead with private chef, custom menus, experience in a myriad of different cuisines or techniques or arenas, it's common, I think, to think that you have to lead with that. And I think that part of your, what you mentioned of that frustration of presenting or feeling like you're on the back foot when clients ask for things that you're either not comfortable preparing yourself, they aren't going to be represented well by you and the way that you cook, or listen, so-and-so, the venue doesn't allow for this. I think that there's advice that I can give, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, is know what your go-to menu offerings are, and if that client wants something in addition to that, they're going to ask you for it, versus this idea of giving the client a blank canvas and saying, please paint on this, and then I will replicate whatever it is that you do. have the confidence to lead with what you do, you do best and is going to work. Because if they have those questions or there's those specific things that they want, they will come to you with those after the fact. But you should lead and take that proactive. That's my advice. I'd be curious to hear.
So I do a questionnaire, and I'll go through it, like, beside the nuts and bolts of who you are and when you want this. It's scale of 1 to 10, how adventurous are you? 1 to 10, how much spice do you like? Foods and cuisines you love, foods and cuisines you hate. Is any dietary restrictions, allergies, etc. Are you okay with the use of alcohol in your dinner? And then they fill that out. And, I'm a 8 for adventurous, a 4 for spice. I love Mexican and Thai. I hate Middle Eastern, Italian. No allergies, alcohol is okay. And then I go from there. And then I have a go-to menu for all 4 seasons. And then I just start eliminating based on, okay, they don't like these cuisines and I take those off. Then I look at things like, what do I not want to make, and take those things off. And just kind of tailor it down to like a 2-page menu of apps, soups, salads, entrees, desserts, and send it to them. But then they still might come back and say, like this last party, like, well, we said we liked Italian. I noticed you didn't put risotto on there. The birthday girl really loves risotto. Can you do it? And that's where I have to come back and say, like, the venue does not, like, it's just not conducive to doing this there. I could probably do a pasta, like a pasta is easier. You put pasta in water and it's done. It's not like a risotto you have to stir. And just, can you find some middle ground? I'm never trying to shove anything down their throat. I really want to build a menu. It's not 100% customized. Like, I have a list of, it might be 400 things that I'm pulling from that I whittle down to them. I'm not sitting there scratching my head saying, like, oh, what am I going to do? Like, I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to be sending out to my customers per season. And then some of it, I allow myself for chef's courses. So I used to let them pick all the courses. Now I've taken 1 to 2 courses out, and then I bring like chef's surprise course based on how adventurous they say they are.
Right.
And go from there. But yeah, I mean, just again, knowing that I can't do everything. And this is a much bigger conversation, but talking about like cultural appropriation and what you're comfortable with doing. Because I think people think because you're a personal chef and it's customized, you can and will do everything, right? Like, if you want Italian food, you would go to an Italian restaurant. You would never go to a Mexican restaurant and get upset that you couldn't get a lasagna. But I think people hear that you're a personal chef and it's personalized and customized. They say, we want lasagna. Why aren't you going to make me a lasagna? And like, maybe I've never made a lasagna. Maybe I don't feel like that's a cuisine that I should be, people will come and want like Indian food. Like, I can make some things Indian-ish, but I didn't grow up eating Indian food, really. I didn't grow up cooking Indian food. Like, why do you want me making Indian food? Like, you should probably just go to an Indian restaurant. And if you want me, like, why don't you order the things that I'm really good at and some of my specialties?
Interesting. Yeah, that could be. I'm gonna put a pin in that for our next conversation. Because I do have thoughts to share. Yeah, and I'm someone who, my dad, who is Indian, didn't really cook that much Indian food, and so the semi connection I had with Indian food was through my grandmother, and she passed away when I was 11, and so it's like I have memories of her food, but I never cooked with her. And then there's this funny dynamic when I go to India. It's like none of my aunties want me to be in the kitchen because it's very much so a household where the woman of the house is the one that cooks, and so it's a very strange like dynamic when I want to be in the kitchen with any of my the people in my family who do the cooking, who have the knowledge to share with me. So I'm going to put a pin in that because I know this isn't going to be our last conversation, and I'd be curious to pick that up on our next one. Let's go into rapid fire stuff. And the first one I have, you can choose the time frame. What is one thing that you've changed your mind on, either in recent memory or since our last conversation?
That's a tough one. I don't know. I think the more I go on, the less that I want to be cooking. Like, I don't know. I just think that's really hard. Like, I left my job so that I could cook on my terms every day. Like, I'm almost upset when I have a gig that requires me to cook. And I hate to say that. Like, I love cooking. Like, it's what I've always done. But I think as, I don't remember when I talked to you, but like the way the podcast has gone and building the community, it's like this Saturday I have to cook. And that means like 3 days this week are taken up with having to shop and prep and menu plan. And it's taking away from like, oh, I've got to release a podcast, on Tuesday, and like this weekend now I have to work and I'm not going to have time to do that. And it should be the other way around, you know? So that, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think you're the only person who is either feeling that by nature of like your restaurant that you used to work at closed down, or culinary school was canceled and you can't go to classes during pandemic times.
I think once you
Or
get out of a routine too, like I'm cooking less
correct.
because of the pandemic. I think
Mm-hmm.
like, not that my skills have gone, but I think once you're in the mode of like you're cooking all the time, you're cooking, and that's what I was doing to make money. And then being unemployed from that for so long, and then jobs being so sporadic, like January, February, and beginning of March has sucked for the personal chef business. So I've just had to go deep into this other thing. Like I felt like I have to be doing something, and that's become the podcast. So now even as the personal chef business is picking back up, I almost feel like that ship has sailed. Like I'm just not interested in it, even though I know that's not true. I love cooking and creating, but like now figuring out where the balance is going to be, like if the business comes back and there's the interest in people hiring me to be a personal chef, like how I'm going to split that time.
I think there's also this sense, and I'm trying to be careful of how I word this. There is a point that I ran into in the start of 2020 when I really dug my heels in, and I was like, I want to cook at all of our events. Like I want to be the one that cooks at all of our that has my hands on the food. I want to be able to, of course, hire other chefs to work with me when it's needed, like when the capacity is needed, or But I would literally get, it came in two ways: direct conversations, like direct feedback, and funny looks in meetings of, you shouldn't be doing the cooking. Like it's literally at cost to the company. Like you are sacrificing resources of ours by you being the one that's cooking, because you should be going to look at this new office for us in Seattle that we're going to move to, and it's going to save us $2,000 a month. Like, and me saying that, no, I want to cook at this happy hour, like that's bad. Like that's irresponsible. And so it's like very interesting. And I'm sure that people who, go from being an executive chef to doing their own restaurant, and you have those conversations where you get told, no, you shouldn't be the one cooking it. Like they go through that same saga, right? Of this, like, it's this thing that I love.
I've had chefs say like, you have to have your head out of the pot. Like you can't be the executive chef and be cooking all the time. Like the chef's job is not to be making the soup for tonight. Like you have people to do that. Like you need to be working on food cost and menus.
That's such a double-edged thing. What is a book that's been particularly impactful in your career? And you can talk cooking, you can talk business, you can talk media production.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone about this the other day. I love the book Becoming a Chef, because it was like the first time I kind of really heard some of these things about like how you become a chef, right? Like they've written some amazing books, and I think the Flavor Bible is one that people always go to, but at a time when there weren't a lot of books about how you actually became a chef, I think you like hearing the stories of these well-known chefs, and whether you do culinary school or not, or like what's the process. And that was a book that I've always loved. It's also a book that I've had signed by 128 chefs, because I counted last week, and had a discussion with the author. So it's also the most prized possession in my house if my house was on fire. I mean, everyone from Rene Redzepi to Massimo Bottura to Ferran Adria have like signed this book, and it, I love it.
Insane.
And but that's an interesting thing, because I was thinking about this today. Like from a technical standpoint, I would say right now, like not the Flavor Bible, the Food Labs book, right, is a great book. And I don't understand people kind of resting on this like old school mentality, because I was in a Facebook group today where someone said like, what's the best book you would recommend to someone to be a cook? And people were saying like Larousse Gastronomique, and it's like, who is like still reading that in 2021? Like, I get it that it's like a classic, but like, really, is that the best? Like, if you gave someone one book to read, I feel like that's such like an old school mentality of like, here are these very classic, stodgy, like French technique books. Like, I understand their place and hold them in a revered spot, but like, if I was going to give someone one book about how to cook, I would say like the Food Lab is a great book from like technical standpoint of how to make like literally hundreds of things and the whys. And I don't understand these people who keep recommending. Someone's like, The Joy of Cooking. It's like, like, I don't know. Like, why are we still having this discussion? I didn't want to get in this debate with strangers on the internet, but I did say to some of them, do you really still think that that's like in this current day, like the best book that you would recommend to people? Like, have you not been in the cooking section of a bookstore in 20 years?
And it's funny that it's his least selling book, but it's the first recipe in Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Chef specifically is not stock. It's something like seared scallops with like a mango, red onion, cilantro kind of like salsa thing on it, and I think there's a vinaigrette with it as well. And so he's like this is very much so how he thinks about the whole book is about learning, and he talks about like languages, and you should be able to like get to a point where you can have phrases like order things at a restaurant kind of thing. And it's like you could get a week into any of these books that we've talked about and know how to make stock and maybe an emulsion, or at the end of 4 hours, like at the start of 4-Hour Chef, after week 1, you have a dish you can serve to your date, like very different way of looking at approaching new domains. It's just very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm noticing your shirt, and maybe that's part of this. What is something that doesn't end up on your Instagram or on your podcast, as in you don't share it very widely, but you get really excited about it or you love it?
Yeah, I got my Star Wars shirt on.
Yeah.
I do love my Star Wars. I would say, I'm a huge music and concert fan, and there's some of that if you even go through Perfect Little Bites. And I do worry that like occasionally, all the people in social media experts will say like, don't put any of that stuff out there. But like, I don't know, it's just stuff I love photography. I did this past year start a new Instagram just for myself, just for like my photography, because I did feel like I haven't done any of it with Chefs Without Restaurants, but with Perfect Little Bites, I wanted that to be more of me, and started putting some of that stuff. And I was like, nah, I really like concerts is enough, but I need a place for photography. But just like really having an appreciation for photography, it's something I really love. But concerts, like I would love to be like a concert photographer. I love music. I think I'm missing live music even more so than going to restaurants right now. I just posted yesterday on Twitter, I went to see Wire, which is like a post-punk band from the 70s, 80s. I saw them a year ago yesterday. It was on the March 9th. And, I took some great photos. I was like right there in the front row. And one of my favorite things is just to go see live bands. So I try not to put too many of those photos, but you'll occasionally see like a thread of like, I went to Nine Inch Nails and there's like 3 photos taking up the block in a row because I thought they were great photos. And like, I don't care if you unfollow me for that. That's something I'm really into.
That's awesome. I mean,
but
part
it's
of
also inspired by that too. Like music for me, like I always have music on in the kitchen. I've talked a lot about how music makes you feel. I love the idea of like, can having certain tempo music, like how are you cooking when you're listening to Nine Inch Nails versus when you're listening to, Ben Folds, like, does that impact you in any way? And I really think that's interesting. And I do think they're connected.
It's like I talk about on my solo podcast episodes, I used to do like the non-industry story as a way to, talk about things that interest me, but also like make it a more regular part of the conversation of being engaged on things that are outside of the industry. So I would call it the non-industry story. But I think I'm trying to, as I ask guests this question, I'm trying to almost like subliminally make people used to this idea of like, oh man, if Justin would have asked me that question, I don't have anything that's outside of like food or restaurants or whatever. And so it's like, am I, and it's not to say that I don't think that people should be dedicated to their work or whatever, but it's like making it okay that you have things that you're interested in outside of, what we associate with our identity, which is being a chef,
Well, that goes back to me making the comment about being so sad about these people who don't have anything going on a Friday night. It's the same people who say like, I don't know what I'd do if I retired. I was like, I do. Like, I could retire tomorrow. Like, I would be, I would go to shows all the time, and I would take up photography, and I would like work in my garden, and I would read like every book I've wanted to read. Like, I have so many things. Like, I used to live in Seattle. I loved going to bookstores and author site, like going to Elliott Bay Books and hanging out down there. I'm a big Chuck Palahniuk fan. I've met him like 8 times. I used to follow him on book tours and get photos with him. He and I have hung out a couple times in Seattle, things like that. I love anything in the arts world, whether it be books, photography. I love going to museums and paintings and music and all that stuff. And I'm just passionate about every bit of it. And if I wasn't cooking, I could retire tomorrow and find things to fill my days. Like, all these people talk about being bored during COVID, and I get it. And I'm not like saying people haven't had it tough, but like there's been so many things. Like, we've slowed down. I'm at home. I'm not bored. I'm not sitting at home bored out of my mind. Like, there is enough to fill my day within the walls of my home every single day if I wasn't able to leave.
Ryan Holiday talks about the hobbies that actually make you better at the thing, because it's like you achieve what he calls stillness, but it's this idea of like giving your mind a break and allowing yourself to, whether it's be bored or enter a state of flow in a different domain that actually allows you to be able to be a better writer or podcast host or write a better menu, because it's like, those are the shower thoughts moments, right? It's just so interesting.
Yeah, but it's like an echo chamber because you and I love the same guy. Like, I'm a big Ryan Holiday fan, big Tim Ferriss fan, like all those people. And I hope so many more people like pick up on them and what they're doing. Like, as busy as I am every day, like finding my time to read my daily Stoic email, like it's only going to take me 5 minutes and making sure I prioritize it on all the crap that's on my inbox.
How do you make your eggs in the morning? And this can be maybe like a question of, the way I frame it is like on your day off, you just had a really hard, maybe like two or three events in a row, and you're making eggs for yourself in the morning. How does that go?
I like my eggs over easy, but fried hard on the outside. So like, I'm a big egg sandwich guy.
Nice.
So perfect world would be like an everything bagel toasted. I don't care if it was fresh. I still believe in toasting your bagel. Flip it over. I want it like kind of crispy around the edges. I don't want it to run all over the place and make a hot mess, but still be a little soft. And give me some like extra sharp cheddar cheese on there, and we're good. Little hot sauce. That's a good breakfast.
Nice. My quintessential question, I don't think you've answered this yet. You somehow get a call right after this interview that you've just won an all expenses paid trip to eat at your dream restaurant. And when you get there, there's someone you've always wanted to talk to, waiting to have dinner with you. What is that restaurant, and who is that person?
That's not a fair question. I would want to eat with Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails because they're probably my favorite band. And I think he's an interesting person because if you look at evolution, I mean, the guy just won a Golden Globe last week. I mean, for scoring a Disney movie, right?
Nuts.
And I think that does kind of represent, like, you look at someone like that who didn't put himself in a box, and he has kind of evolved over the years. So just a huge fan of his music. And I love Mexican food. So I think, as much as I love Cosme in New York, I'd want to go to like Mexico and eat at one of Enrique's Pujol down there. I think would probably be. So like, if I could hang out with Trent Reznor at Pujol, I think that would be a really good time.
Nuts. Yeah. Good choices. Last question for you, Chris. What do you think chefs can be doing better to help the next generation?
I think being encouraging to them and staying with the times and realizing that like evolution is a thing and real, right? Like, just because how we were taught to be a chef isn't necessarily the way that the next generation needs to be taught. What we learned were restaurants. Like, can we rethink what a restaurant is? Can we rethink what a sustainable career in food and beverage is, and not be those people, like I said, like, not just kind of saying, because I did it this way, you should have to too. The idea of paying your dues. And I think, and whether that be a book like La Russe Gastronomique, I mean, just these people are in this mindset of like, I went to culinary school for 4 years. I had to pay my dues. I had to come up through the ranks of a restaurant. I had to read these books. Like, it's a very different world. And like, realizing that and being encouraging. And, maybe it's because I have kids. Like, I want to, if my kids talk about wanting to be YouTubers, it's like, I know some parents think that that's the worst thing, but like, if my kids could make $100,000 a year reviewing video games, like, I don't think that's the worst thing. I know a lot of parents would disagree with me, but like, they think it's so cool that like I'm doing this thing. Like, I came up to have a quick dinner between my Clubhouse thing and this, and they're like, "Are you famous?" I'm like, "Well, no." And they're like, "Well, who are you talking to?" I was like, "Well, I was on a panel with some people who are on Top Chef, and I'm talking to this guy." And to them, that's like cool and being famous because that's the world they're living in. And again, that's a Gary Vee thing, right? About like not being stuck in that kind of mindset. Like the world is changing, and I think I'm young at heart, even though, I'm in my 40s. I still act like a 20 something. But I think there's a lot of evolution coming. I think it's going to get only faster with AI and VR and all this stuff. And the food world is also going to be changing with that, and not being the grumpy old man on the porch, and realizing that there's different ways to do things.
Where do you want people to go? Where even individual specific things? Because I certainly get intimidated by this of like, people ask where to find me, and I can give you one of 6 links. But if you have a specific one that you're like, I really want people to go here right now, and then I'll include a secondary one of like maybe your main stuff. Where can people go? And then I have one last question for you.
Yeah. If you go to chefswithoutrestaurants.org, that's great, because I have it set up with like 4 links of things I want people to go to, one of which being the podcast. And then, one of them is going to be the Facebook private group that I have for people to do that. And then, I'm Perfect Little Bites and Chefs Without Restaurants on all social media platforms.
Do you want to leave anybody with anything? Any parting thoughts or things? Again, I know you and I are, in particular, are going to have more conversations to come as we're playing podcast tag, but anything you want to leave people with?
I don't know. I love this industry, and I love people who are in this industry, and I want to build, like I said, I'm trying to build the community that I've always wanted to see. I want people to be a part of that. So anyone who wants to connect with me, like, I am an open book. Like, my phone number is on the internet. My email address is out there. Like, I have people like randomly texting me saying things like, I got let go from my job. How do I become a personal chef? Like, and I'll take the time as I can. So, reach out to me on social media. I want to build the largest network of like people in the food industry. And I don't discriminate. If you work in a restaurant, I get it. I love y'all, but I've specifically been working on building a network of people working outside of a traditional restaurant setting. So yeah, find me and come connect.
'Cause you're famous. You're famous to us.
Everyone's famous for 15 minutes or 1,500 followers. Everyone has 1,500 followers, don't they? I mean, I'm sorry for anyone out there who doesn't have 1,500 followers, but
Yeah.
Thanks
for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
What's up? Justin here again. Because, if you're still listening, you didn't not like this episode, right? And if that's the case, I'd like to think that you'd get value from the other work that I share here online. It's all focused on helping chefs and hospitality professionals perform better. If you don't have a lot of time, the best place to start is with the email newsletter that I write every single week called the 80/20 Edge. That's where I share knowledge on sharpening your skills, asymmetric upside, and exploring the industry beyond the status quo. And I say it saves time because I include all of the content that I publish that week all in one place as kind of a weekly digest of sorts. Next up, you should check out my YouTube channel for gear reviews, clips from podcasts just like this one, and documented experiences from some of the best restaurants in the world. And lastly, if you'd like to learn about my intense cohort-based professional development-focused course, get coaching from me to help you make your next move, or just support the show, you can check out justinkhanna.com/support. And if you do support this show already, that's greatly appreciated. Thank you. Finally, it really does help to share a review of this show on Apple Podcasts to help the podcast universe know that people like us like shows like this. And until the next episode, my name is Justin Khanna, and I hope you have a good one.